Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to That'll Be the Day. Now, this podcast is slightly different because it features an interview I recently recorded for BBC Radio Merseyside's Drive Time programme with Nancy Kelly, who's the chief executive of the campaigning organisation Stonewall. Now, if you like the music at the start of this podcast, it's a track called That'll Be the Day by the Liverpool band The Vow. Now, normally I play that track in its entirety at the end of my podcasts, but today I'm going to play something different by The Vow, and to find out what it is, you'll have to stay tuned.
Next, this story though, if you've been listening to BBC Radio Merseyside during February, you'll have heard some of our coverage of LGBTQ plus Awareness Month. We've spoken to some fascinating people who've told us about their lives. Liverpool John Moores University has also had a programme of events to celebrate LGBTQ plus, and one of them was a talk online by Nancy Keeler, the chief executive of Stonewall. Stonewall campaigns for the equality of lesbian, gay, bi and trans people across Britain. And our reporter, Tom Walker, has been catching up with Nancy.
A lot of your listeners will know that Stonewall was founded really to fight back against a piece of legislation called Section 28. And we were founded more than 30 years ago. And what Section 28 did was make it illegal to talk about LGBT people in school. And it had an incredibly damaging effect on students, on families and on teachers. And where we've arrived at now is a world in which this year, in most of the nations of the UK, so England, Scotland and Wales, because of the work across the movement, including by Stonewall, LGBT inclusive education is going to become a statutory requirement. So schools up and down the country for the first time are going to teach about our lives, our families, our relationships.
From a practical point of view, what effect did Section 28 actually have?
It had a devastating effect on LGBT teachers. Many left the profession altogether because they felt so unsafe. Those that stayed felt at risk, that their jobs were at risk, that their lives were at risk, had to live with really the stress of never being themselves at work. And we know how deeply that damages people's mental health. But for children, for LGBT children going to school and growing up and going through their teenage years, it meant that often no adults around them were out gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans people.
Do we still see the effects in schools of Section 28?
It's hard to say whether it's about Section 28 or just wider social change being slower than we'd like, but we do definitely still see far too much homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying. A lot of the work that Stonewall does with schools is around supporting teachers and training them so that they can create really safe environments for the children and young people in their schools.
You mentioned the pace of change. I mean, the first legislation in the UK Parliament to decriminalise homosexuality was passed in 1967. Do you think there's still an awful lot more that needs to be done, or are we more or less where we should be now?
If you think just about laws, we're still in a situation, for instance, where lesbian and bi women have unequal access to things like IVF. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that for trans people in particular in the UK, we're at a point in time when things feel like they're going backwards rather than forwards.
We've all been living through the lockdown, of course. What effect has that had on the LGBTQ plus community?
So it's had an enormous effect and a really profound effect on mental health. And I think what we can also see is that for many LGBTQ people, our safety has been really seriously impacted. So we're trapped in homes where maybe we're isolated from our support groups. Perhaps we're living with family members who kind of don't support us in our identities, who don't value us the way we deserve to be valued. But for some LGBTQ adults and children, we're trapped in homes that are literally unsafe.
This is the dreaded job interview question. Where would you like to see things in 5 years? You know, you'd have been at Stonewall then for around 5.5, 6 years. What would you like to see changed?
I think one of the biggest things for me is that we live in a climate in the UK in particular that is incredibly hostile for trans people. And I would love to see that changed. And I would have also loved to see the beginnings of the absolutely kind of seismic change that LGBT inclusive education is going to bring to our communities.
That is Nancy Kelly, the chief executive of Stonewall, which campaigns for the equality of lesbian, gay, bi and trans people across Britain.
Well, there you go. That's my interview then that went out on Radio Merseyside's Drive Time programme with Nancy Kelly. Now, I know what you've really been waiting for is to find out which track I've selected to play. It's this one, Che by The Vow.
Messiah complex on a motorcycle. Hate after death would be your disciple. Where lives are cheap and death comes free to everyone. You're Robin Hood and an army major. Your mother's martyr and a nation's savior. You don't back down. You just won't back down from anyone. Wandering insider, terrorist or freedom fighter. Eye for eye, fire with fire. The world's insane until you change your world. Share. On a motorcycle, you save your breath, I'll be your disciple. You stole from thieves, I know you don't